I finally defeated Bermuda grass. I pulled it out by the entire root system. There's absolutely no way it can come back.
It's coming back.
Bermuda grass is my worst enemy because the way that Bermuda grass grows is it sends out runners and rhizomes deep underground. They can go up to 6 feet deep into the soil. If you're really gonna tackle the issue of Bermuda grass, you need to dig and find the end of that runner, which you'll probably never actually find the very end of it. Because look, I just dug down and each one of those little blades of Bermuda grass was attached to an even thicker, stronger runner under the ground. Now I have found some roots for that strong runner, so I think I'm pretty good to pull that out. And that's about as good a job as I could do for the current time. And I found a lot of the roots where the Bermuda grass is actually sucking up nutrients in the ground. Here's where it was attached, where it broke off when I just pulled it out. And I know exactly where that attachment was. And I see a long root system right here. So I can just follow that attachment in the ground. And I kind of just follow it along with my finger and feel where it goes, and I try to get as much out of the ground as possible. And actually, for a time, once you start pulling it out, it's actually a little bit of an enjoyable process if you're pulling it out of nice, wet, moist soil. But that enjoyment soon runs out when you pull out as much as I have lately, because this entire area was completely infested with this devil grass right here. And if we look at this area, we'll get some key indicators as to why it's growing so well in this little patch, but it's not really bothering the rest of my garden here. So this little patch of exposed soil right here currently is in the shade, but when the sun in the sky goes this way in the sky and is in that direction right there, well then this patch of soil is in the full sun without any plants covering it, without anything to protect this area from the Bermuda grass that is in this lawn from creeping its way in. And the thing about Bermuda grass is it does really well in full sun. It thrives in those conditions. Because those conditions are going to continue to persist in this area, I know that pulling out this box of Bermuda grass is not a long-term solution to keep it out of this area. But that begs the question, why is the Bermuda grass doing so well right there when this section right here is in the same kind of full sun? Obviously, the big difference between these two sections of garden is this one has nothing covering it, and this one has a ton of plants that are keeping the Bermuda grass out. And if we look closer at these two sections, you can see I'm not trying to fool you. It's not just that there's Bermuda grass in this section of the lawn, but not in this section of the lawn. If I look around in here, I can find plenty of runners in this area of lawn. So I know if I see them above ground, I know they're underground and they're trying to make their way into whatever fresh, delicious, beautiful, exposed soil they can find. And if I pull up some of the leaves of this nice plant that is keeping the Bermuda grass out, I can see that the runners have made their way in to the soil right here where this plant is overhanging. And they're continuing to try and push through this plant to get right up into the sun where they can then get some more strength and continue to grow. But now if I pull out that section of Bermuda grass that was in there, I can see the underground runners and rhizomes. They're a lot weaker than the ones over here that were in the full exposed sun. Now this area does get full exposed sun, but right underneath these leaves and this grass right here, it's creating a little shady area, and Bermuda grass does not love that. And because this is such a thick, dense layer of vegetation, the Bermuda grass is going to have a really hard time getting in here. Look at this. It's just one plant right up next to another. Where's the Bermuda grass going to thrive and get access to that precious sunlight that it so needs? Now I pulled out these huge clumps of Bermuda grass that were just matted over this area just about 5 or so days ago. And look, all of this is starting to come back. And I did as good a job as I could getting all of the deep rhizomes and root systems out of here. But those rhizomes and root systems are still coming back. And that's why pulling Bermuda grass alone is not a solution to preventing Bermuda grass. It actually will only make your problems worse if you just pull Bermuda grass and do nothing else. Because where there's one strand of Bermuda grass, you know that's eventually gonna fork into multiple strands and create a big problem for you if you only pull Bermuda grass. Pulling Bermuda grass makes the problems a lot worse, because if I break it off right here where my fingers are, well, these two strands are just gonna go crazy with a ton of energy. That's where the plant is gonna focus all of its energy. One thing you could try is covering your Bermuda grass with a layer of cardboard, or more ideally, thick layers of contractor paper. But just covering with a layer of cardboard alone, and even with a nice thick layer of grass clippings on top of that, is not going to completely smother out Bermuda grass. You can see I have some here. I have some coming up here throughout this bed. That's a sunflower, but this is all Bermuda grass that's trying to poke back up. This is a very dangerous place to try this experiment, because this is a lawn thick and full with Bermuda grass. And while the cardboard and grass clippings will do a good job of smothering out that Bermuda grass initially, once the cardboard gets wet enough and decomposes and starts to break down, you're gonna have Bermuda grass shooting up through that moist, wet soil and grass clippings. And this is actually gonna act like a nice blanket, a nice hug for the Bermuda grass, telling it to do its job even better once it hits the sunlight, and to reproduce and to spread across this bed and to give you an absolute nightmare. Late at night, you're thinking about that Bermuda grass that's slowly creeping its way into your garden. So if covering Bermuda grass alone won't work, how can we keep it out? What I tried to do here was to seed this area with sunflowers. And obviously these are not really thick and dense enough to really prevent Bermuda grass. I do have them growing a lot more densely over there, but that area of the lawn is not really a good comparison, because there's just not as much Bermuda grass growing there compared to this area. You may be wondering, why are my sunflowers really struggling here and they're doing so well over there? Well, I made a video on this and it was pretty controversial. I got a lot of mixed opinions. I said maybe this cardboard was contaminated, maybe it was just the thickness of the cardboard. I used cardboard here versus contractor paper over there, but there's also more Bermuda grass in this section of the lawn. People said the cardboard wasn't breaking down fast enough. People said it was contaminated with chemicals. I'll link that video in the description, but the main idea here is that these seeds did not come up to provide a nice dense layer to really protect from the Bermuda grass. And maybe the Bermuda grass beneath this cardboard is even part of the reason why these seeds are not doing as well as the ones on the contractor paper. And I recognize that this was a pretty extreme experiment. I didn't even have soil on this part of the cardboard, and I just had a little bit here to see if the sunflowers could grow down through the cardboard. But if I were to do this again, I would try to make this area that I'm trying to establish on Bermuda grass look a little bit more like that area, because this area gets hit with full sun, this area gets hit with full sun, but it's doing a pretty good job of keeping that Bermuda grass out. And it's doing this job without me doing any work whatsoever. These are all perennial sedges and grasses and flowers and things that will just come back every single year without me doing anything, without me replanting or pulling or covering or doing weird experiments in the middle of my lawn. So ideally, how I would do this experiment different and how you could potentially establish right on top of Bermuda grass is to cover with, maybe a layer of cardboard or contractor paper if that's your thing, or maybe just a really, really thick layer of compost and then some wood chips and stuff on top. But then the most important thing, none of that is as important as this, is to plant the area super, super dense with a lot of ideally native perennials that will keep that Bermuda grass out. You really need to have an area that will produce a lot of shade to keep that Bermuda grass from encroaching in to your garden beds. Shade is the enemy of Bermuda grass, but I have heard there's actually a hybrid Bermuda grass, which is bred specifically to thrive in both sun and shade. Whoever created this, please stop what you're doing right now. You are a mad scientist and you are messing with fire. You must stop. Unless you have one of those varieties that thrives in shade, most likely you have one that's not going to do well in shade. Now, while these beds do a really good job at keeping out the Bermuda grass, I really don't maintain the Bermuda grass from encroaching in this area at all. There's something else here that's called a honeyvine. And this honeyvine, you really can't let it take over in the garden because it will spread like a very aggressive vine, and it will create these big seed pods at the end of it, and those will make more seeds and more vines. And this vine, which I have growing up through all of my roses here, is also attached to a root system underground. And this root system will survive a harsh cold winter, and then in the spring send up shoots that will vine up through your plants a lot more aggressively than Bermuda grass. But even with their crazy aggressive nature, I still prefer this over the Bermuda grass. These grow a lot taller. I can identify exactly where they're growing quickly and just go and quickly pull them out. And even if I'm just pulling them out at the soil level, if I'm doing that consistently, just doing a quick pass through, that seems to keep them at bay a lot better. And another thing I'm doing here is putting down mulch like these grass clippings here. But then the most important thing, and the reason why I have a lot less this year compared to previous years, is I'm letting my roses and all of these plants grow in however they want, just a full dense flush of roses. Last year, I did trim my roses down about yay high in the early spring, which is what most people do with roses to keep them at a nice, clean, cut, manageable size. But clean cut and manageable is just not how nature works. And so if you're gonna fight nature by cutting your roses short and keeping a lot of open gaps and spaces in your garden, well, then you're gonna have to fight nature by pulling out a ton of these later on. Instead, why not work with nature? And when your roses start to get out of hand, build a nice little trellis system where you can then allow them to climb up. Because don't you think it's gonna look amazing when this homemade arch is full of roses instead of just having a few clean cut rose bushes out front in my garden? The cool thing here about letting these roses go is I'm getting a ton more blooms than I ever have. They were just, you know, a handful like this on a small plant, but now this plant is sending out so many more new shoots and blooms. Okay, I have a serious confession to make. After I just filmed all that, I looked up this honeyvine, and it seems this may actually be Honeyvine Milkweed, which can be a host plant for monarchs. So now I feel a little bit conflicted because I looked this up before, I identified it with an app I have, and if that app is correctly identifying this, it says initially that this plant is an invasive plant, but it just says it as like a common term, like it can invade spaces. But then I look at the map and it's showing me that this is actually native to the area I'm at here in the Midwest in Ohio. So now I'm thinking, do I keep this Honeyvine milkweed to encourage monarch populations? Because that's something I definitely want to do, but I know it could also take over garden spaces and maybe smother out the diversity of those spaces. So I'm a little conflicted on this. I'm gonna do some more thinking and digging into Honeyvine milkweed, and I'll probably post another update about this in the future, but also let me know about Honeyvine milkweed, your thoughts on this. Is it good, is it bad? I don't know. Now that I've told you exactly what I do to keep out aggressive weeds like Bermuda grass, I want to hear from you. Have you tried anything in your home garden to keep Bermuda grass from encroaching into your garden beds that isn't spraying harmful herbicides like glyphosate-based products on it? Please don't tell me to spray chemicals on it. I assure you I'd rather have Bermuda grass take over my entire life than spray a drop of that stuff anywhere near my garden. I'd love to hear your ideas about how to keep this stuff out of your life.